Hey, this morning we are starting a new series in the book of Ruth. And as we're starting here, what I want you to consider is have you ever noticed how much we love an underdog story? Right? We love stories where the overlooked get lifted up, where somebody who was picked last wins big. Right? This is why movies like Cinderella, Rocky, Karate Kid, Rudy. It's like the only time anyone from the South ever thought positively about Notre Dame. Even Captain America, underdog story. And I think what it is that we all deep down are drawn to stories where things aren't as they should be, and somehow, against all odds, something changes. And I think the reason that these stories move us so deeply is that God made us for those kinds of stories. He made us with a longing for rescue, a longing for redemption, a longing for somebody to come along and set things right. And here's what I know. Some of you right now, ladies, you're like, I was raised to be INDEPEN. I don't need no man. I don't need nobody to rescue me. Well, let's see how the book of Ruth unfolds, and we'll see if that's where we are at the end of this series. But I think the reason that we love stories of redemption is that ultimately it was the story that we were created for, and really, redemption is the story of the Bible. Like this book, though it is full of a bunch of different books by a bunch of different authors spanning a couple thousand years of the time that each book was written, this tells one story. And God's story is a story of redemption. And this is why we want to be true worshipers, and part of that is our personal time with the Lord, spending time with Him, reading this whole book. Because when you read this whole book, what you recognize is that it's all one story kind of unfolding with different acts like in a play. The first act is creation, right? God creates everything from nothing and it's good. And that lasts a whopping 2 chapters. And then there's the fall, right? Sin enters the world. And really what happens for the bulk of this book is what I like to call the fallout. The fall happens and then there's all these ramifications that come. But then, Jesus enters the scene. Redemption walks on earth. And then, ultimately, the very end is pointing to what we would call restoration. So this whole book is a book about redemption. And most of the Old Testament, and because the Old Testament is the fatter half of this book, most of our Bible takes place in the fallout. The world is broken, people are suffering, sin is wrecking everything, God's at work, but His people are longing for rescue. And what God does is He sends people like Abraham and Moses and David, and they help and they lead and they deliver in part, but none of them fix everything. And it's because they are not the rescuer, they are not the redeemer. Ultimately, they are pointing to Him. They all point to Jesus, the true and better rescuer and redeemer who would one day come and do everything necessary for redemption. Right? That's what we celebrated last week on Easter. Okay? And so it's important to know that where we find ourselves in the book of Ruth is right in the middle of the fallout. And what Ruth is that it's this really short book that gives us a beautiful picture of how God works redemption in the middle of ruin. And so what this isn't one story about one family. What it really is a window in to God's character. It's a preview of the gospel. And it's going to serve as a reminder for us that even when life feels ruined, when we feel like we're compromised, when we're bitter and we're broken, that God is still writing a story of redemption. And so we're going to begin today in Ruth chapter 1. And let me tell you, where we start today is ruin. And here's what I know is I've read this book personally. It's a fantastic book. The temptation is to rush past the ruin and get to the redemption. Why? Because it makes us feel good. It makes us feel like there's hope. And here's the thing, we're going to get there. But I believe that the ruin is included for a reason. And so this morning when we pick up in Ruth, the setting is dark. The circumstances are bleak, and it's in those moments when desperation creeps in. And so the overarching principle that I don't want us to miss this morning, before we jump in, is this. When desperation drives us to seek security apart from God, it leads to devastation. When desperate circumstances tempt us to seek security apart from God, it leads to devastation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to open up to just the first 5 verses. We're going to see the desperation and we're going to see the devastation in these first 5 verses of Ruth. It says this, in the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And when they reached Moab, they settled there. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah. It's not Oprah, okay? Okay? It's hard. It's hard to get there, okay? Orpah, not Oprah, okay? I know some of you are visualizing what she looks like right now. It's not her. And the other, a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her 2 sons or her husband. Y'all good to go home now? Here, do this for me real quick. Can I get a little bit more house lights? I want to be able to see y'all a little bit better. This is one of those where I want to be able to see y'all, see your faces, okay? Because listen, that's a whole lot of ruin in 5 verses, isn't it? Death, widowed, loss, emptiness. Like it's a whole lot for us to wrap our minds around. And what I want to make sure we do is not only understand the circumstances that Ruth and that family was experiencing, but I want to make sure we understand the whole context of this time period. Because in verse 1, the author of Ruth lets us know when this is happening, and it's really important. In verse 1, it says, in the days when the judges ruled in Israel. Now, that's like a historical timestamp. We know the period of the judges is between about 1200 to about 1020 BC. Okay, this is after Joshua, before the monarchy, right? So we kind of have an understanding of when this is in history, but I don't think that's the point of this timestamp. Right? You and I think about time like, okay, did this happen in 1972? Okay, that's not what's happening. When the author tells us this is the time when the judges lived and ruled, the author is telling us about the type of world that they were in. This isn't when this was happening. This was, here's what life was like. It's like when you hear somebody talk about back in the Depression. Okay, mentally you can know when the time period of that was, but what's happening is we're saying this is going to be a time when things are bleak, when resources are scarce. That is what's happening. Because listen, the time of the judges was about as bad as it got. The end of Judges summarizes this time period this way. It says this in Judges 21:25. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. Now, I know we're talking about thousands of years ago, that verse could apply now, couldn't it? Right? We live in a world where by and large people just do whatever feels right in their eyes. And let me just ask you, how is that working for us? Same thing was true then. Judges is a chaotic time period. There's violence. It's spiritually dark. Socially, it's broken. Politically, it's unstable. And I can summarize the book of Judges for you this way. The same cycle keeps happening. Israel rebels. God judges. Israel cries out for help. God sends a deliverer called a judge. Things are good for a moment, and then the cycle continues. Over and over and over. And what's happening is, as the book progresses, not only is this cycle happening, but the consequences are getting worse. The people involved, like the first couple judges, they're pretty outstanding people. They come, they do good work. By the end, the hero we get is Samson. Breaks every vow. And what would happen is that when judges would come, they would not only defeat the enemies, but they would actually restore Israel back to this place of spiritual connection with God. Not so with Samson. All he does in his dying moments is take out a bunch of enemies. And so this is a bleak time period, and the author of Ruth wants us to know that's when this is happening. Which, if you think about it, actually makes the famine make sense. Because see, in Deuteronomy 28, what God had told his people when they're given the covenant is, hey, covenant faithfulness will have all of these blessings. But covenant unfaithfulness will lead to these types of curses. And one of those curses was drought and famine. Now listen, we can't definitively say that this famine is a direct result of their disobedience, but it makes a whole lot of sense that it would be. And so I know for us, we think about a famine, how would that even happen? Famines come downwind of drought. Okay? No rain, no water, no crops, therefore no food. And I don't know about you, I didn't grow up out west. So when I think about a drought, I just think about some of those summers where it doesn't rain for a while. Everybody's grass gets a little bit brown, right? You can only water your lawn on certain days of the week. Right? Maybe even for us, we think, okay, maybe this is kind of hey, was it a couple years ago, y'all remember when all those chickens got sick and egg prices were absurd? Right? And for a while, it was do I really want to eat an omelet? It's $17. Right? We think about a famine and we think about those terms. This type of famine was very severe, and I think it lasted for quite a while. And so it would be hey, dad got laid off from his job. The severance has been blown through. Our savings are gone. The unemployment check is not enough for us to live on. And mom and dad are having questions at the dinner table after the kids have gone to bed, asking, what in the world are we going to do? That's the situation that Elimelech and Naomi find themselves in. And my guess is that if you're in here, most of us have had moments where we're trying to make decisions when the pressure is high, but the options are low. They're in a desperate situation. And let me just tell you, desperation does for them what it often does for us. Desperation opens the door for compromise. Desperation opens the door for compromise. Right, what it does is it forces us to consider things that if all the circumstances were right and good and easy, that we would never consider. And I want to acknowledge, the text does not explicitly reference compromise. But if you know the history of the Bible, I think it's very much implied. Because when the original Jewish readers would have read this story and they would have heard, oh, they moved to Moab, sirens start going off. See, from all of Israel's existence, Israel and Moab were enemies. Like from the very beginning, when Israel comes out of Egypt and they're trying to get to the promised land, all they want to do is just walk through Moab to get there more quickly. They say no. And what that does is it actually puts a wedge, not just like relationally, but actually spiritually, between the people of God and the people of Moab. But even more up close and personal, Judges 3 talks about the Moabites oppressing the Israelites. Right? Like, these are not people that like each other. And this is not a neutral move. This is not just like, hey, I got a job opportunity in Decatur, Alabama. Should we move there? All things being equal. This is a people leaving the land that God gave them and seeking refuge among a group of people who did not know or honor their God. See, the Moabites, they worshiped other pagan gods. And listen, the Moabites were not known for anything good. Their origin story is quite possibly one of the most graphic and hilarious yo mama jokes in the Bible. Okay? If you don't know it, Genesis 19, Lot and his daughters, that is the origin story of Moab. I will say nothing more about it because it is gross and it is despicable. But from the beginning, what we're seeing is that these are not the type of people that you want to associate with. And so to move your family there, listen, especially at a time when your sons are nearing the age of marriage, is putting yourself in a spiritually dangerous situation. Because the Bible is full of stories of God's people intermarrying with people who did not follow God. And listen, we'd like to think we can date them to Jesus. Let me tell you, dating them to Jesus didn't work any better then than it does now. Now let me tell you something that worked for me and Lauren. Dumping them for Jesus works really well. Sorry. If you don't know our story, it's a fun one. Listen. But listen, what happens is that when people who follow God align themselves in marriage with people who don't, the person who does not follow God typically does not end up coming alongside of them, at least not in the Old Testament. What happens is that it threatens your personal faithfulness to God. And so listen, I don't think Elimelech is thinking about this with ill intent. I don't think he's ever thinking about this like, I'm going to move here, we're going to stay here for a really long time, my kids are going to get married here. He's not thinking about all of it. And that's why compromise is so difficult, is that oftentimes some of the worst decisions in our life did not feel wrong or evil at the time. They feel necessary. He probably thinks he's doing the right thing. He probably thinks he's doing the best that he could do for his family, and he could have never known what he was setting his family and his wife up for. And I'm sure there's a period of time where that move feels prudent. They get there, there's food, maybe there's a new job, right? It feels like the decision worked. And that's the challenge with compromise, is that oftentimes it works just long enough that we think it was the right call. And so it tells us they settle there, sons get married, they stay for 10 years, but eventually every benefit they receive from moving to Moab evaporates. And I want you to think about what he did. He leaves the promised land. He takes his family out of the land of promise into a land of compromise. Compromise often disguises itself as relief, as an easier path, as wisdom. But desperation always opens the door to compromise. And we know what this is like in our own lives. Right? Go back to high school. I'm desperate for approval, so what do? I give in to peer pressure. Right? I'm desperate to feel love, so I compromise on who I date or who I choose to marry. I'm desperate for a promotion, so I take a job with bad hours, or I uproot my family and move them across the country for something that looks like a better opportunity. In those moments, it's not that the decisions we're making are necessarily evil, but what they are is we start looking for security somewhere apart from God. And so even though our compromise does not usually begin with ill intent, inevitably, compromise leads to consequences. Compromise inevitably leads to consequences. Right? And here's what we know. We've had moments of compromise enough for us to know that sometimes those consequences are big and severe, sometimes not as much. But when we compromise, when we lower ourselves under God's standards, we know that we are setting ourselves up to experience devastation. And listen, I'm not saying that we can necessarily draw a direct line between Elimelech's decision to move there and his death, okay? It does not tell us why they die. And so we can't speculate as to why they die, but listen, the decision that was supposed to bring them security did not bring safety. And so because of that, Naomi is left in the worst possible situation. Right? Her husband has died, so she has nobody to provide for her or protect her. Her sons die, so they can't either. And that's specifically problematic at this time period because women were largely dependent on men for their security and their survival. And so not only is Naomi grieving, but she's also vulnerable. And she's far from home, which means there's no extended family. There's no relatives there's no uncles, there's no cousins, there's nobody near her. And because she's no longer in Israel, she has been removed from a group of people whose God had written down rules to take care of people like her. And so when we find Naomi here, she is empty and she is in ruins. And if you just follow the structure of these verses, it is written in such a way that it is supposed to stack and build on top of itself. We're supposed to feel the weight of her loss. And listen. It's important that we recognize that there are stories like this in the Bible. Because when you and I inevitably have moments like this in our lives, it shows us that we are not necessarily out in left field just apart from him. This story is one of the greatest stories in the Bible, and where it starts is a place of ruin. And I think that one of the reasons that this book resonates so deeply with us, it feels so particularly familiar to us, is that most of us know what it's like to look up and realize life is in no way what I expected it to be. Right? It may be because you have lost somebody that you like. Literally, as Chandler was doing announcements this morning, my dad is in the picture of the slide about being a faithful steward. When we got to Peach Valley, there was no ounce of my heart that ever believed that quickly I would only be seeing him in pictures on a Sunday morning. Right? For you, it might not be loss. It might be that you have a relationship, maybe a marriage or a relationship with a child that is so strained and so fractured, you don't know which way is up. It feels like this is as worse as it could get, and you don't know what to do. Listen, this does not offer us a pretty solution wrapped in a bow from the very beginning. But if we will stick with this story, if we will stick with the story of redemption that God brings, it's going to ultimately give us hope. That the same God who's at work in this story is at work in our story. And so what I do want to do is make sure that we see in these moments of desperation, you and I are going to have to make choices as well. And sometimes we find ourselves in these moments because of decisions we've made, sometimes not. The question is, when we find ourselves in a desperate moment, church, where are we going to look for security? Will we trust the promises of God? Or will we run to what looks safer? Will we stay rooted in obedience, or will we drift towards compromise? And listen, here's what I think can happen. I think it's possible for us to say, listen, Zach, I'm a Christian. Of course I'm going to depend on God. Of course I'm going to trust in God. Like, why are you making it seem like it's even an option? Let me tell you something very interesting about this story. Does anybody know what the name Elimelech means? His name means, my God is king. And so you have a guy whose name literally means, my God is king, living in such a way that doesn't seem to be true. Living like everybody else who did what was right in their own eyes. You have a guy who wears the label of a God follower, a label of a Christian, and yet his life does not back that up. And so what that is it should serve as a warning for you and I that just because we wear the label of Christian, just because we are a Christian, does not mean that when times are difficult, we're automatically going to default to the right decisions. We can wear the name Christian and not live in a way that shows he's our king. We can still make decisions based on what we think is best, not what God's word says is best. And just like Elimelech, I think we can be tempted by greener pastures like Moab. And so I'm curious for you, what are the greener pastures that you fantasize about? For some of us, it might be a job, more power, more status, more money. Listen, for others of us, maybe it's that you fantasize about a different family where things are easier, where there's less chaos, where every evening is puppies and rainbows and unicorns and ice cream. Listen, y'all chuckle, but you know, if you're in the throes of parenting young kids, you're like, where are the children that are back in the room right now? Because honestly, y'all know, Sunday mornings, for the most part, best behavior. Anytime somebody comes up to me and they start talking about, hey, I had Ella today, I braced for it. I'm like, oh no, what'd she do? They're like, she was fantastic. I was like, good. Why doesn't she do that at home? Right? It's easy for us to think there's just easy solutions, right? And listen, I think some of the time we're in a situation where it feels like there's famine and the greener pastures don't make sense. That's true in this story. Listen, this is a story where names matter a lot. Bethlehem means house of bread. But the house of bread is out of bread. It's like going to Panera Bread. Hey, I want a sandwich. No bread. Can I get a bagel? No. Somebody get a Sharpie and X out bread on the sign. Right? It makes no sense that the house of bread has no bread. And the question for us is, when the house of bread feels empty, when the bread that God offers, the sustenance, the life that God has provided feels like it's lacking, are we going to go to things that seem better, but that can never actually deliver? When our life feels like Bethlehem with no bread, let's not run to Moab for relief. Don't trade God's promises for something that seems easier or safer, and let's not let desperation make decisions for us. And so listen, I understand that some of us in here this morning may feel a lot like Naomi. Desperate. Life feels barren. The pressure is real. The future is uncertain. The temptation is to run to whatever is easiest or quickest. But what this book warns us of is that when we seek security apart from God, eventually difficulty and devastation is going to come. The thing you think will bring you security is not as safe as being exactly where God placed you. The question is not if these moments are going to come. The question is, where will we run and who will we trust when they do? And so, like I said, this passage doesn't give us a nice tidy bow. And so I'm not going to either. I'm resisting every urge. Every fiber of me wants to lift it up for you. But I'm not going to do that.